Hey everybody, DM Gallibond here, and it's time for Last Week at the Table, where we recap the actual play games that I run over on Twitch every week. We have a game Thursday night, Saturday night, and Sunday afternoon. Without further ado, let's get started. Alright, so in the Sword Coast Chronicles on Thursday night, the party was still at the Blue Border Inn in Vallaki when we started. They were in the middle of playing at the Blue Water Inn. Mulek was kind of going around and talking to some people in the crowd, and he specifically went to a table where there was one person who was kind of into the performance and a couple of people who just had that 1,000-yard stare. And so he started talking to them. And the one person that was really animated and into the performance, he allowed us how all three of them worked at the lumber mill. And he talked a lot about how he liked the music and blah, 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 and da, blah, blah. And when Mulek asked the other two people, he just got monosyllabic answers. Music's good. Yes, it's fine. Tired today. Things like that. So just really very strange. And again, no emotion, not reacting to Mulek much other than just responding to questions. Got a very creepy vibe. So they decided very quickly, all right, we've had enough of this place. Let's go over to Lady Wachter's house where maybe we can find out some more information. Because after all, they had been invited by the two boys. So they got over to the house and found that this is a really old house. And it's kind of sagging and, obviously it was very expensive and in its day, but now it kind of looks a little run down. And the two boys, one of the boys met them as they were approaching the door and invited them in and took them to the parlor to meet their mother. And so they were looking around the parlor. They saw a big portrait of the family patriarch over the mantle. And they noticed that the Lady Wachter, she had a kind of a faded green dress on, and it had a very unusual collar to it, and it was a collar that kind of was almost looked like it was made of a different material. And as Thalodor was kind of studying that, he noticed at first what he thought was a little gem at her throat until it blinked. And then he realized it wasn't a gem, it was an eye. And about the time that he noticed that, Lady Wachter sort of smiled at him and put her hand up to her throat, and this thing began uncoiling from around her neck and crawled onto her hand. And they realized it's an imp. It's not a collar, it's an imp. It's a living creature. A fiend, no less. Alright, so they were really curious what was going on here. What had they gotten themselves into? Well, as it turns out, the imp was not so... didn't seem to be much of a threat. Lady Wachter wasn't hostile to the PCs, and the imp was not terribly hostile. And as it turns out later, during dinner, the two sons had actually kind of told their mom that it was the PC's idea to sabotage the Burgomeister's festival that was upcoming and not theirs. And when that ruse was uncovered, well, Mom wasn't very happy with the boys. But she allowed us how there's good reason that her family dislikes the Burgomeister. Namely, that the Wachter's daughter, Stella, had been pledged from an early age to marry the Burgomeister's son, Victor. But as the two kids grew up, uh, the son, Victor, the Burgomeister's son, Victor, kind of just was sort of not very interested in. It's not fair to say he wasn't interested in girls. It's fair to say he's just not interested in relationships at all. He had decided that he would prefer to go join the monastery. And that really, as far as the Wachters were concerned, that's kind of an insult to their daughter. That any boy would prefer life in a monastery to life with her. So they were not terribly happy with him. And then they also learned that it had been a very shocking blow to poor dear Stella. Stella was somewhere in the house, but they didn't see any sign of her. So they talked to the Lady Wachter, talked to them some more at dinner, and tried to persuade them that they really should try to help sabotage this festival. And if they did that for her, a small favor, she would help them get an audience with Lord Strahd, who certainly could help them get out of Barovia and get back home, which is what they really need to do. Now, we have a bard player. And the bard player, he's playing his bard as though this bard is kind of a ladies' man. And so I knew there might be some opportunities, but I didn't push anything. But when he offered to show Lady Wachter some fingering on his guitar, I had her respond with, thinking that was more attention than she had received from a man, especially a younger man, in quite a long time, and that she sort of appreciated that attention. And so the players discussed, and the bard's player said, well, if I take one for the team, that might give you guys a chance to go sneak around the house and look and see what's here. And they, the other two players were like, I don't know how much we want to go sneaking around. There's that imp poking around somewhere. They know enough to realize that imps can go invisible. So they are not quite sure how much they can trust that they would ever be able to get away with anything without being observed. So one thing leads to another. The boys, the two adult sons of Lady Wachter, they get sent to one of their rooms. The companions of the bard get sent to the other son's room to spend the night, and the bard gets invited to Lady Wachter's bedchamber for the evening. So everybody thought everything was going according to plan until Lady Wachter led the bard into her bedchamber, and the bard realized that Lady Wachter's dead husband is laying in the marriage bed with copper coins over his eyes. Corpse is perfectly preserved, but she had told them earlier that he died 3 years ago. So for 3 years, his perfectly preserved corpse has been in the bed where she sleeps every night? And now she expects the bard to be there? And indeed, she rang a little bell, and a couple of servants came to the room and picked up the husband's body and carted it out of the room. And the players, all the other players except for the bard player, they were just dying laughing. They thought this was the most hilarious thing. The poor bard player, he was like, oh crap, what the hell? So it was a very humorous situation he wound up getting himself into. And then at the end of the session, because we kind of, they did do a little sneaking around, found some stuff in the library. They discovered the location of the daughter because she started making noise when she heard or when she had a sense that there were strangers in a room that normally her brother is in. She was sort of banging on the wall and whatnot, and that caused a disturbance and a commotion. And so one of the servants came up and dealt with that commotion, which the other two players could hear through the wall between the brother's room and the sister's room. And so, I had that I kind of described the sounds they were hearing while that was going on, and that was a bit of a struggle. I didn't know whether they were going to try to intervene or go and help or whatever. They just were very hands off. They didn't want to get involved, so they just heard that whole thing going on, and that took a little bit. And then, of course, the bard is in the room with Lady Wachter. So the last thing we did for the evening is I just had the bard roll a Constitution save. And I know what that's for, but the players don't know what that's for yet. And so we'll start next session by revealing what he was rolling a Constitution save for. So if you want to see how this all plays out, come and join us next Thursday, 8 p.m. over at twitch.tv/Gallibond. And you can find out what happens in Sword Coast Chronicles, The Mists of Barovia. Okay, everybody, for our second week on Saturday night, we had another planning session for what are we going to do. If you'll recall, last week we had decided that we were going to play a second edition game on Saturday nights, but there was some debate about what the setting would be. Well, we went back and we hashed over, and nobody could seem to settle on whether they really wanted to play Ravenloft, really wanted to play Dark Sun, or really wanted to play Dragonlance. There were some people that liked all of them, some people that disliked all of them. So I said, let's go and let's throw two other settings out there. We'll throw the Planescape setting out there and the Greyhawk setting out there. And eventually we still couldn't decide. So everybody decided, let's put it to a vote of the dice. And we started with all five settings, and we rolled 10-sided die, and I said 1 to 2 is this setting, 3 to 4 is this setting, 5 to 6, so on and so on. Then we eliminated the ones that got the lowest number of votes, and then we went to the second place, and we kept going, and finally we came to Greyhawk as the setting. So we are going to start a second edition campaign in Greyhawk. We are not precluding that the storyline will take us to any of these other planes of existence. So, I mean, I have the one planeswalking game. The difference is that I'm just going to have to figure out how an NPC from an existing module from one campaign gets to another setting and gets the players back to that setting so that we can transition to that for the game. I'm not trying to write a whole big huge story arc because I just don't have time to do 2 homebrew games. But I have plenty of material that I can start us with a homebrew game in 2nd edition, and then we can work our way from there. And we talked about a few of the elements that people would like. They want to make sure they have ample opportunity to role play. Everybody would like to have a little bit of mystery, but don't have it be a steady diet of mysteries. So we're not going to set, for example, Candlekeep Mysteries in 2nd edition and then just go through those. That is completely out. But we're going to go ahead and we're going to have some fun with this campaign. I think it's going to be quite enjoyable. Now, people have asked for some links for some resources, so I'm pulling those together, putting that in Discord for the players this week. And then Saturday night we will meet again, and we will start potentially rolling up characters. Everything is on the table for them to roll the characters up with. We're going with all of the race and class combinations that are available in 2nd edition, and we will go from there. So, if you are the kind of person that enjoys watching the sausage be made, and you want to see the character creation and all that kind of stuff, you're free to join us on Saturday nights. I'm streaming it so that I can record it, so that I have it basically as notes. Don't expect to find archives of this part of the process on YouTube. I can't imagine anybody would really want to watch that much of it. I was surprised we actually had at one point in time 7 or 8 or 9 viewers on Saturday night just sitting around watching us debate what setting we would want to play and trying to figure out how we were going to get to that. We weren't even actually really rolling any dice or playing D&D. We were just talking about playing D&D. So I'm hopeful that there's enough interest in it and people will want to go ahead and find out once we do start playing. But I'm not going to discourage you if you want to join us Saturday night in the chat over on twitch.tv/Gallibond. We will be there beginning at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Okay, everybody. This week in Walker of Waterdeep, we had an epic battle, and I am just really tickled at how well this went off. Now, you're going to hear that there were some dramatic events that happened in the battle, and that's fine. The players prevailed, but it taxed the players to their limit. And that's exactly the way I intended this battle to be. I wanted it to be a winnable battle, but I wanted it to be a battle where they were really going to have to go in and plan for the battle ahead of time, work their plan while they were in the battle, and then still it was going to be a challenge for them. And I'm really proud of how well they were able to do, given the challenge that I laid out before them. Okay, so what they have been building up to is they have been building up to a confrontation with Ryusei, the Fallen Star. That is one of the 5 spirit dragons that is a guardian of the plane of Kamigawa. And in the lore of the game, there's one of these spirit dragons for every type of land. And Ryusei is the one for the mountains, which obviously goes to red mana in the game. So, in my game, I had said, because I needed something, so I said, all right, one of these spirit dragons has been corrupted by all this Kami war, and it just happens to be Ryusei. So they need to go and they need to repair or heal the corruption. The only way they can heal the corruption is they have to fight this guy, subdue him, get him down, basically knock him unconscious, which means fight him all the way down to 0 hit points, dealing enough subdual damage that they don't actually do real damage to kill him, or do real lethal damage to kill him. And then there's a ritual they have to perform to repair the corruption. And the corruption, the physical component of that corruption, is a scale of his that has been removed and that came into the party's possession in a previous plane of existence when they were there. They got this thing and they didn't know what it was at first. And they were in Innistrad, they got this thing, they couldn't figure out what it was. They had to go to Ravnica to open the container it was in, and then they saw that it was something that looked kind of like a dragon scale, and it looked a little bit like an object that one of the other players has. And they eventually learned that that object has some sort of a connection to Kamigawa. And so when they went to Kamigawa, they then ran into 4 of the 5 spirit guardians who said, "Oh, you all are the ones that have been foretold." And they're like, "What?" "Yes, you have been foretold because you carry the key to healing the corruption of our fallen brother. Ready to say the falling star. Go and please go and repair that damage." Well, that's all the spirit guardian said. Well, then they had to go and do research on what this guy is like. And they found out this guy is pretty powerful. His breath deals simultaneously, it deals a combination of fire and necrotic damage. What does that mean? That means that you have to be able to resist both fire damage and necrotic damage in order to resist his breath. So we have one party member who, because of his race and class and specialty, he has resistance to fire damage even before he makes a save. We have another party member that is a barbarian, Totem of the Bear, so he is resistant to everything except psychic damage. And then, of course, he also gets to make saving throws. So there were several things, but aside from the barbarian, nobody has a way to mitigate or reduce both fire and necrotic damage without saving throws. So this is a full-grown dragon, 60-foot cone of breath. So huge area to be in, and a lot of people in the party are melee. Another thing I gave this dragon is I used partially a template of a shadow dragon from D&D 5e. So I gave him several nasty movement-oriented and breath weapon-oriented effects. One of the movement-oriented is I gave him that teleportation effect that the shadow dragons have. Now, for a shadow dragon, it's teleport to shadow, where they can teleport from one area of shadow to another area of shadow. But this guy, because he is a guardian of the mountains, I said that anytime he is in contact with a mountain stone, he can basically teleport in a similar way that like an earth elemental just can sink down into the rock and travel and then come up to another rock, except the dragon does it instantaneously. He sinks down over here, he pops up over here. And but he doesn't have that if he's airborne, or if you can somehow put something between him and the mountain stone, like let's say a sheet of ice, which that was something that they had figured out in their planning stage. If you can get him off of the mountain stone, he can't do that. So there's one way you can keep him from bouncing all over the place. So at least now, if he's going to move, he's got to, use actual movement or flying or whatever, which means now if he moves that way, he's open to opportunity attacks. If you're there. But he also has a lot of resistances he has a couple of immunities to damage, a boatload of resistances if he is in contact with stone, very few resistances if he is away from Mountain Stone or if he's separated from Mountain Stone, up in the air, whatever. So there was these little keys I gave them, and they had to kind of figure out in their strategy, how are we going to do this so that we don't have to deal with all of these things. They figured all that out, and they focused really, really, really hard on how they could get things that he would not be able to resist, because there was two key things he cannot resist. He cannot resist radiant damage, and he cannot resist psychic damage. So they had to figure out how they were going to be able to reliably deal radiant and psychic damage so they could get the full effect of their weapons, even if he managed to remain in contact with the stone. So how did the fight go? Well, the fight went really, really, really well. This guy has armor class 18, 300 hit points, and he's got all of these, movement abilities. His breath weapon, which recharges on a 5 or a 6, like other dragons do, and he's got his legendary resistances and his legendary actions that he can do. So the barbarian and the cleric, the warforged cleric, who's the one that has the fire resistance, they decided they were going to be the ones to engage the dragon, because the barbarian has the highest hit points and he halves damage on everything he gets. The cleric has the highest armor class, which of course, as the cleric realized after the first time he used the breath weapon, okay, being up close and personal, even though he's got fire resistance, I think he had kind of forgotten that he didn't have any resistance to the necrotic. So the first time he got breathed on, he made his saving throw, but he still took a boatload of damage because he was taking half damage because he couldn't resist the necrotic. He wasn't taking quarter damage because he resisted the fire and made a saving throw. So he was still taking half damage from the necrotic, and that was a bit of a concern to him. And then the cleric opted to do some offensive things, and he didn't opt to heal himself. Foreshadowing here. Well, the dragon couldn't recharge his breath weapon on the second round, couldn't recharge his breath weapon on the third round. And by the third round, they had this guy down to where he was bloodied. But he was just barely bloodied by the time the dragon's turn came around on the third round. And of course, his tail has a reach of 15 feet, so he can, on his legendary actions, once they got him off of stone and he wasn't able to do that teleporting jazz that he normally does, he was stuck on that ice there, and he was still able to whack people and knock people, not literally knock people down. That was one thing we discovered I thought maybe I had missed something. But did you realize that in 5e, for an adult dragon, the tail attack, it doesn't have any kind of thing where it says it knocks you prone. Now, I didn't try to add any fancy stuff because I figured this guy was already tough enough. So I did not, some of them said, well, are we going to have to roll for being knocked prone if we get hit with this? And I said, well, let's just double check. And we looked at the stat blocks and I said, I based this guy on a template of an adult dragon. The adult dragon doesn't have that effect. So I'm not going to add this effect to be punitive to you guys. You have enough of a fight on your hands. So I didn't make them do that. But they were, this thing would hit them and it would connect and it would deal like anywhere from like 17 to 25 points of damage when it hit with its tail. So it's a big chunk of damage when you get hit with it. You're gonna know you got hit. So they were dealing with that, and then the 4th round, the dragon's breath weapon recharges, and he breathes again, and the cleric failed his saving throw this time. He'd already taken some damage from the first breath weapon, and then he had been hit by the tail. And I don't know if you guys remember what happens when a shadow dragon reduces you to 0 with its breath weapon. Well, the same similar thing happens here. You immediately die. You don't go to saving throws. You don't go unconscious. You just die. And in your stead, for this particular dragon, an undead magman, which is an undead fire elemental creature, pops up in your place and is under the dragon's control and starts attacking your friends. So it's like the cleric is gone, down, dead. And now, in his place, a little fire elemental nasty creature is starting to go and attack people. That freaked the party out. They were like, oh my god, I can't believe that. Oh my god, the cleric's dead. And then they still didn't knock him all the way down dead to the 5th round. The dragon did get a turn on the 5th round. And on the 5th round, his breath weapon recharged again. So he got to breathe again. This time, the bard was in the wrong place. And the bard already had some damage from some other things. The bard went down. So now there was a second one of these little fire elemental creatures. Undead elemental creatures. And we had a second party member dead. And by this point, the barbarian has taken so much damage, he's down to under 20 hit points. And he's right up in the grill of this stupid dragon. And he's like, oh crap, is this going to be a TPK? But the monk who normally goes toe-to-toe and fights people in melee because he has the ability to stun his enemies, this dragon, since it was the only enemy on the field, I just said, condition, it cannot be stunned. The reason I did that is because I didn't want to make the fight be a cakewalk for him. I didn't want them to be able to go, oh, okay, well, the monk is just going to punch it and stun it, and then everybody else can just beat it down and it can't do anything to defend itself. It's like when they try to go to that well a lot. And so it's like, okay, I want to change this up and make it. And they were aware of this. This wasn't a surprise to them. They had discovered this in their research. So they were already planning for this. And the monk was doing ranged attacks with a bow. And even though he has a great dex, he was like missing 2 out of every 3 of his shots with the bow. It's like the dice just hated him. Yeah, this thing has an 18 armor class, which is okay, but yeah, these guys are 8th level, and it's a full party of 8th level characters, and he's got decks for days on this monk. So, yeah, you would think that his attack bonus is pretty darn good, and he was still missing. He was still missing with these shots because these arrows were special arrows that would deal either necrotic damage, or no, I'm sorry, would deal either psychic damage or deal radiant damage. So they had arrows that would pack a punch for this creature and would hurt it. But then in this final 5th round, the monk says, "Screw this. I've just seen my cleric, my best friend, die. Now our bard has been taken out and is dead. I'm not being as effective as I want to be with this bow." Throws the bow down, uses his boots of flying, goes right over to it. It's like, I get 2 attacks per round plus flurry of blows, and my attacks are considered magical, so I can at least hurt this thing if I can't kill it. So he launches into, he throws a punch, takes the dragon down a few points, and then throws his second punch and connects, and that was just enough to knock the dragon down to 0 hit points. And so the dust settles at the end of this fight. The druid has been over there, and she was one of the MVPs of the entire fight because she had spells that could put ice down, sleet storm, so it turns the ground to ice. So that's enough to get him off of contact with the stone. Then she also had a like a create rain or something like that, and it basically gives falling water, and that was one weakness I gave this thing. I said, if you can get this thing into running water or have it be in falling water, because I wanted them to have the idea that snow, sleet, rain, that would be their friend. It mitigates a lot of the resistances that it normally has. Or actually, no. It gives it disadvantage on its attacks. That's what it does. I said that if you can keep it in falling water or running water, it will have disadvantage on its attacks. So when it would actually try to do those claws and bites and those tail attacks, it was having to do those at disadvantage because of the druid keeping the rain down. So that was keeping them from getting hit quite as often. I mean, it still landed some attacks because it's a full-grown dragon. It's got a very good attack bonus. But, it had enough of those low rolls there in those disadvantage rolls that they were missing a good portion of the time. Again, I wanted it to be a tough fight, but I wanted it to be a winnable fight. And when the dust all settled, the monk had managed to stay out of the range of the breath weapon. The druid had been hit one time by a tail attack, so had taken a little bit of damage. The barbarian was sitting at like 8 hit points or something like that. 8, 11, 14, somewhere in there. But well less than 20 hit points out of his normal 100. So way down, almost like 10% or below of his hit points. The cleric is dead. The bard is dead. So, yeah, I'm really happy with how tough that fight turned out to be. Now, there's a ritual they still have to do, and the barbarian is the key person in that ritual. So the barbarian is still alive. Good. they could do this ritual to cleanse and restore this thing. I've communicated with the player of the cleric and the player of the bard, and I've said, you can consider rolling up a new character if you want, but your character may not be completely gone. I mean, you are dealing with one of the guardians of the entire plane. So, I mean, once this guy's back in his right mind, he's pretty powerful. And he's got 4 very powerful friends who actually asked them to go do this. So there's potential ways. I mean, it's D&D. I mean, death is hardly ever really permanent death in D&D. But, you know, it is a time, and both of the players were like, do I want to roll up a new character? Or do I want to try to get my current character back? I think they're both leaning to, let me get my current character back. But they both were like, yeah, give me a blank character sheet so I can think about, you know, if I want to create a new character, what I would create. Come back and join us Sunday, 2 p.m. Twitch.tv/Gallibond, and we will talk to you then. All right, everyone, that's going to do it for last week from the table. Try to remember to keep your games interesting so that you have tales that you can tell from your table as well. Good night, everybody.